Hello everyone. The lesson of today is WPF Datagrid. Now, it's a quite challenging experience for me. When I was learning this, I had some trouble because until some point it's easy, but after you want to do something interesting, it gets very complicated. Of course, it's not complicated when you learn it, but everything you don't know is always frightening. So let's start immediately. So I want to divide this page into two, and the left side will be a data grid. So what I do is I add my data grid object. First, I will divide it into two. Okay. So I have my data grid on the left. At the moment, it's empty. There's nothing inside. And I will give it a name. Data grid left side. So data grid left side, I have it here on the left of my page. And now first I will show you the fast way. If you need a simple data grid, you don't want anything inside like images or progress bars or anything. You just want a simple grid with rows, and you can also use boolean values. It will show them as checkboxes. And for this, the fastest way is you just need to create one class defining your row. And for this I'm writing data grid row, but actually I shouldn't do this because it may get confused with the original value of Visual Studio. So I will just write one person. So we have a name, and keep in mind you need to use get set. So if you don't use get set, this will not work. When you feed this class into the data grid, it has it doesn't show any values if it doesn't have get set. And also make this public. Name, surname, name, surname. Let's also put an ID, which is an integer. Also, let's put one double value, and let's put the weight. So until here, with integers, doubles, and strings, it's simple. We have one class. So what we do is, let's say we have a database with this data of people. You can just read the database, create one instance of this class, I'll do it like this. List of people. Okay, so I have a list of people, and this list is containing one person class objects. So I will create 3 sample people so we can add them to the Datagrid. And this is one way, but also for faster writing, I can just give you a tip on the way. Let's say person 1. I can either declare person 1, and then I can write person1.id. And the reason why I made these public when I created it is because in the other parts of the program, in order for me to reach them, access them, they need to be public. You see ID, name, surname. If I remove this, I cannot access it because it doesn't have the authority. So it must have public in front of it. And person1 dot, I can either go like this, list them down, but what I prefer is using a one-liner. After I declare this, I just open whatever this is, and I just write name. My first person is Michael Jackson. So ID, let's write the ID 2, ID is 0, and weight $60.0 kilogram, and I close it. This is not a string. Okay, so this is more simple rather than that writing person1.id equals person1.name. It takes 6 lines, and when I copy this, I can also easily do like this. What people I have, let me see. Okay, I have Jane Doe. Weight is 50 kilogram. I have Jose Ramon. Okay, so I have 3 people. Actually, let's make it 4 so the other one doesn't get lonely. John Turdmeister. Okay, so I also want to add a boolean here so you can see how it shows up in the Datagrid. Public bool, and let's make it something like this. If can drive. So if this guy can drive, if he has a driver's license, it will be true. By the way, I do this with the Alt key. When you press Alt and go down like this, you can write the same thing on simultaneous lines. Learning this from a friend. I was programming since 2-3 years, and after the 3rd year I learned this. It's truly a lifesaver in many cases, and it increases the coding speed very much. So you just press Alt and you can go vertical. So Michael Jackson cannot drive. Jane Doe can drive. Jose Ramon, of course he can drive. And John, he can drive too. So only Michael Jackson cannot drive in this scenario. So we have one person class. There's the information of each person one by one here. We have the ID, which is an integer, the name, which is a string, surname, string. We have the weight, which is double, and there's a boolean value called can drive. And as you see here, I made a list of people, and I will just add all of these people into this list. Look, now this is one way. I will do this 4 times. Or what I can do is same as I did while I was declaring the new instance of a class. I can just put 2 marks here, and I can remove these, and I can convert these into items instead. And this way, while I am declaring the list, I am also adding new objects into it. Okay, so we have 4, and while I was declaring it, I was giving it names, person 1, 2, 3, 4. Instead of that, here I have a name property which operates as the same thing. So before I was like one person equals new one person. The one person I write here, when I add it into a list while I'm creating it, it becomes the name. No, it doesn't. I made a mistake. So I cannot give a name here. I don't need one. It's already in a list, and it's the element of the list, so I can reach them from the number of the list. So what I will do is I will directly use list of people and Datagrid left side. So Datagrid left side item source will be list of people. And now let's see what happens. Let's simplify the code a little bit. Okay. So when I start, you see the value is shown here. There's also a checkbox because it's a boolean. It got the structure, but the data is not here. The data is not here. So this doesn't work, guys. So let's go back. We need to declare them one by one. Let's also make the IDs 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's try again. Yes, now it works. This is something I also saw now. I always use this way, but I tried to do that, and while I was showing you, I learned that it's not possible myself. So we have the list now, and you can notice there's one more line at the end. The reason of this line is for the user to be able to add rows manually. Okay, when you press enter, it adds one more. If you just want to display the data and you don't want the user to play with it, you can go where you declared and allow user. You can user add rows. You have to make this false. Okay. And when you make this, the final mysterious line disappears. And now the user cannot add rows. Also, if you don't want the user to play around with the data, you can make read only is read only true. This way he will not be able to click on the cells and change the values. You see, now I'm clicking it and nothing is happening. And one more thing that's important is it is auto-generate columns. There's something called auto-generate columns, and by default this is true. Okay, by default this is true, and if I make this false, let's see what happens. You see, nothing is visible because we left the column creating columns to Visual Studio, to the code automatically, because when we created this class one person, and when we assign item source to a list of this class, when auto generate columns is active, it automatically uses the names of these properties as columns. This is the most laziest way you can work with. Okay, this is one of the laziest ways you can work with. If you have a simple table, the only different value is a boolean, you can use this, it will make a checkbox. But if you need something more complicated, this will not work for you, because I'll just make auto generate columns true again. At the moment you can display numbers and strings and booleans nicely. There's no problem, it automatically gives the name. Let's say you have a multi-language app and you want to change the column names. You don't want to use the original ones, or you don't want to use the ones that are written in the code. What you do is you have to modify the Datagrid column names, columns headers. Let's say 0 Datagrid left side dot column 0 dot header equals, let's say it's Spanish or whatever identity. And I want to write something like this, some kind of Latin. I don't know if even this word exists. And I made the first column a custom name. The columns are 0. Automatically generated columns are not possible to be modified here. As you see, it limits us. So what will we do? If you want to finish it short, you can use this method, but the more complicated method, not so complicated, but more convenient method is, I will not use a list of people. What I will do is, you can see the data here: ID, name, surname, weight, and can drive. What I will do is, I will also add an image, because with item source, images also don't show. So if you want a photo in the cell next to each row, it's not possible, because it cannot automatically create an image column. It doesn't work. So what I will do is I will make one property called image source, and it will have a photograph of the person, and for each person I will create an image source. Bitmap image, new URI, and my URI will be, I have a folder here inside the main, inside the debug folder, and I have 4 photos. So I will connect these photos for each person in my program. The folder is inside my main application running address, so app domain.current domain.base directory plus student photos and nope, like this. How the hell was that? Okay, student photos, and the name is name plus surname, Michael Jackson. For now I will hard code it. So okay, I created the view is big, this image source, and I read a file from my hard disk. Expected. Okay. Jane Doe, Jose Ramon, John Turdmeister. So I added an image source object into my class, and also into my example persons I added their photographs paths from the disk. In a real life scenario, this would be a database or a data table. You would have to assign every person from the data table, and in the data table there would be a string that shows the location of their photograph, so you can write it here. Now I'm hard coding it, but I think you understand the idea, because at the moment I need to show you fast. I don't have a database. Okay, so we have 4 people, and now in order for this image to be visible inside the cell, Visual Studio is stupid. It doesn't do it automatically. I think it should, because it's obvious when you put in image source, it should understand it's an image, or if you make this an image object, it should automatically, as it does to the strings or booleans, it should be able to do it, but that's none of my business. We know that it cannot do it, so we have to declare columns. And what we do is, in our data grid, same like we do in a standard grid, we have to create data grid columns. We have we have one text column and a template column. The text column is the standard column that's used for writing text and numbers. So in our structure we have 4 texts, 1 checkbox, and 1 image. So I will add 4 text columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 checkbox, and there's something called Datagrid template column. In this one you can put whatever you want in the Datagrid. It's a template, but using this one is a little more complicated, because you need to declare what type of object it is. For these, I also need to set the bindings. In WPF, a binding is something called, it's a connection between the code and the interface. So let's say the first column, I want ID to be displayed. So I need to make a binding here. How the fuck was this? Yes, I don't use bindings so much. So this one, the first one, is ID, and I can give this text column a name also. So when I'm translating, when I'm using multi-language systems, I can read the context of this from a language file, a txt or database, and I can change the header very simply. I will just say ID column. So in the future, when I want to change the column name, I can just reach it with ID column. I will use ID column dot header is the French version of whatever it writes in here. ID column, name column, surname column, and can drive column. ID name. It's actually not very complicated, but if you are coming from Windows Forms like me, this stuff is very new. So we gave a name for the columns that we created, and we binded them into our class objects. We also have weight, by the way. So we have 4 texts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 boolean, and 1 image source. Okay, so this is the 4 string columns. This one is the checkbox column, and we have a Datagrid template column. Declaring this is not so simple, so what I do is, there's a simple template. WPF Datagrid template column. So I'll just find one sample of it. Okay, here it is. So we have declaration header, okay, first we will declare it with the initializer and finalizer, and then we will put this in the middle, and the one we write here is what we want to be inside the cell. So I will write image I will create one image, and the source will be binding into photo. So we have a column, and inside the column has a cell template, and this cell template has a data template. This is the object we insert inside that will go into the cell, and I put an image object, and it will be binded into photo, and photo is an image source. So the source of my image is an image source, which is photo. And here in my object, you see photo is a bitmap that I read from my hard drive. So if you want a complicated, funky data grid, you need to create the columns and what type of column they are, and then you have to use binding into a custom class. And when you read data from your database or some file, you have to assign them into an instance of this class like this. You have to create a new object, and then you can either collect them in this list, or you can add them to the Datagrid directly. Datagrid left. What was our Datagrid name? Left side dot items dot add. You can either add them like this, person 1 2 3 4, or you can make a list and make it in item source. But when you make it in item source, don't forget to make auto generate columns false, because then you'll see what happens now. If I make auto generate columns true, the reason why you would want to make a person list is because instead of adding them one by one to the data grid, later when you are looking for them, you will have to reach the data, and instead of going through the data grid items, like for example, let's say you need to get information from the 5th row. If you want to get the value, Datagrid left. That's not a good name, by the way. That's a stupid name I gave. Datagrid left side dot item source equals person list. Okay, so now I have a person list, and when I select one row from the data grid, if I get the selected row number, I can find the object from this list index. I will just choose person list item number 5. If I want to reach, let's say, column number 3, 0 1 2 3, the weight of a person, I have to go into the items of the data grid, and I have to go there. But if I have a list, I can also use the list for enumerations. For example, I can say person list dot where ID equals 3, or person list where s dot name dot contains, let's say I want all people with the name that has s in it. I can use link with this list. So filtering and working with the data is more easy. This is why it's important to first add everything into one list, and then making it the item source of the data grid. Because if I use data grid left side children or items, this is not an enumeration list. Items dot, maybe I have to convert this to as queryable, then I have to do some extra shit and go deeper. It's not necessary. You just add everything into one list, And when you click on the data grid, you already get the index number. From this index number, you can reach into the person list. Or you can simply use the ID number to find the object you're looking for. You can say person list where object ID is 1 or 2 or 3. So let's see, we have an item source, is person list. Let's start. You see I have a list. Okay. We have 4 people. As you see, because I made auto generate columns true, what it did is it added my columns. Also, it added an extra set, and the set that he added is shit, totally shit, because it cannot convert the image source into a photo. Actually, if it could, it would be nice, but it doesn't. And this is what we added with our custom columns. See, in order to fix this problem, multiple rows, you just need to make auto generate columns false, because we already added our own custom columns. We don't need that. We don't need that shit. Yeah. Okay. So now it's normal, but I see the checkbox. The sizes are not nice because my source image sizes have some difference. And the second column is the surname, and it's not visible. What happened? String Datagrid text surname. I think there's a typo here. Yes, the N is big. So because I wrote the binding wrong, it couldn't reach this object. This is why I do everything from code much as possible, but in WPF sometimes you have to go inside XML. I hate this shit, but there's nothing to do. Okay, and we have the cell template. We can also make the photos uniform. We can make them 50 to 50. This way it will look more nice. Okay, nice. Still we don't have column headers because we didn't declare them at all. So I can write them here, and or I can write them from code because I gave the name for the columns. If I have a multi-language app, I can scan the chosen language file and change the column names, but I'll just write them here. Header is ID. Three, four. Okay, now I also wrote the headers. And it's visible here as well. Yes, so we have a nice data grid, and we can do anything we want here. For example, if I want to put some kind of graphic or something, I can just put a canvas here. I can draw something on it. I can do whatever I want with this Datagrid template column. It's very flexible once you learn it, because in Windows Forms you don't have, it's very hard to do stuff like this. You need to do some amazing stuff, juggling and shitload of work to make it happen. But the idea is simple. You have to add columns that are in correct format. In numbers and text, you need to add a Datagrid text column. If you want a checkbox, you can add a checkbox column. If it's something else, a canvas image, or I don't know, a group box or a button, you can use Datagrid template column, and you can give each row different events. For example, let's say I have an image here. Inside this image I can put a clicking event. Images don't have click, I think it has preview mouse down. And I can put one event here. Okay, and I can go to this event, go to definition. You see, when I click, when the image is clicked, I can directly, this person list, I will make it public so I can access it from here. When you make it public, you cannot use var. So person list, I add 4 people, and from here, when I click the image, I can just say Datagrid left side dot selected index. When I get the selected index, it's finished for me, because, and then I can catch it. I can simply use person list Datagrid selected index, and then I suddenly reach all of this data. Dot, you see, weight, name, photo, and when I go to, let's say, name, I can get the name of this guy by the image clicked, and then I can use this to activate another code special for this guy. I can show up his notes or whatever, so I can do random stuff for each people. As I said, I use the selected index, and I don't, getting the cell value from the Datagrid is more complicated. Let's say I click the row, and if I want to get the information that's written in the row, and then things get messy, because in WPF the interface is not designed for clicking on it and going deep inside and getting the information, and it's a slow process because it has to unfold all of the levels. So the easiest way is just use the selected index and reach the data from the item source. This is the easiest way. And whatever, yes, let's check out something else. Also, there's one more thing. Let's say you want to paint the rows according to the data. So this is also a little tricky, because there's something called row virtualization. That means if you do anything outside from code. Let's say I open this Datagrid and I manually change the back color or changed some values in it, not from the list, not from the item source. I mean, I typically went into Datagrid left side 5th row and changed the data or changed the back color. What happens is, let me show you what happens in one of my apps. Finding this was a very big problem for me because I program machines and you always have deadlines, and this kind of stupid stuff comes to you at the field and they say there's something crazy going on and you cannot understand what it is. Okay. So let's say I have an app like this. I have to show this part from already written up because this problem only happens when the list is full. Okay, there's a property called enable row virtualization. Okay, and what this basically does is, well, the guys in Microsoft thought that if there was a very big list, okay, and instead of filling up the read-only memory, the RAM, with the information of this list, they decided let's only show the user and keep in memory the part that's visible inside the Datagrid screen. So when you use your mouse down event or when you scroll down, the new rows that come up are dynamically loaded and shown to you. For example, let me show you. So here you see I go down and up. These colors are painted dynamically. So after line 28 I don't see what's there, and also Windows, it doesn't keep that in his memory. When I scroll down, it loads it dynamically. This way, if I have a 1000 row list, it doesn't fuck up my performance. So when you open row virtualization, because these rows are painted according to values, okay, let's say if it's number 9 it's red, if it's number 10 it's brown, etc., and I paint it dynamically. But if you have row virtualization on, what happens is when you scroll down, it forgets the manual changes that you made, and when you scroll back up, I will just enable it just to show you. When it loads it again, it loads it wrong. It either confuses it with other rows, or the values are changed, or the colors are changed, and sometimes also when you click on something, the events misfire, they show you wrong stuff. And now at the moment you see it opened from number 20, and above number 20 it's supposed to be all red, but when I go up, you see it's going crazy. Green, yellow, brown, all kind of different shit, you know, it's so annoying. And also when you click on something, it tends to crash also, because one time I clicked on it, it said it saw the text box as a label or something, and it's going crazy. You see, and every time I go up and down, there's some different shit happening. You see, now it's blue. I go down and up, now it's red again. Go down and up, it's some purple shit came up. And this happened to me in the customer. And imagine you're installing machinery and this happens, and of course it's not something good, it's not something professional. So what I did is I made row virtualization false, but this is not a good way for big lists. I did this because in this app the lists are not so much big, because the longest list is not more than 200 lines. But if you have 2000 lines, in order to solve this problem, what you have to do is you need to do these coloring events, and you need, if you want to play with the Datagrid, the Datagrid has an event called loading row, okay? And this is basically what happens when you scroll and new rows enter. You need to use e.row.background. So every time you scroll it fires this event again, and you can check the data. If it's like, let's say, if it's true, you want it red, you can paint it red here. This one is brush is that, yes. You see, I put it in the loading row. And also there's one more event called unloading row, and this is what happens when the row disappears, goes outside your visible range. Well, this is not so important, because after you don't see it, what color it is, it's not relevant. So I only use loading row, and I compare the data. If this cell equals this, I paint the line into one color. This way it doesn't get confused, and also the performance doesn't get affected, because when you close row virtualization, the performance seriously changes. So this is it for today. I hope I was able to assist you. This is how I do it. I believe there's many other ways. This is, for example, maybe some people do everything from XML and whatever. This is my way. This is a way I found, and I like this way because it's simple. I just create one class, put it in a list, and feed it as an item source. Rather than that, creating Datagrid columns according to your requirement is the key point. So this part should be understood carefully. And bindings are also important. Basically, you use a binding to connect the column into the class. You need to write the names of the properties into the bindings. So that's it for today. Thank you. Take care of yourselves. Bye bye.